And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's something we had a little bit of a conversation about that via email. And I think what started it was I was telling you that, the idea of outlining a novel, I just do short stories, and I'd love to write a novel one day, but I'm so unorganized. And the idea of outlining it and knowing everything that's going to happen before I start writing it was so daunting. And you said that, and you gave me the reasons you said, but you also said, it makes it kind of fun once you get to that halfway point. Now you get to figure out with the characters, okay, now what happens? How do you get out of this or whatever?
Well, so, yeah, by the midway point, your characters should live and breathe on their own. They should definitely start to have opinions and say things that you don't, that you weren't expecting them to say or do. And that happens all the time. And, I always have a basic idea of where it's going. So like right now, like I have an outline for the third book. I'm waiting to see what the reaction is to the second one before I commit to it. But assuming people like Murder Mind, because right now it's got more pre-orders than my first 4 books combined, cool. Which is terrifying. A lot of anxiety to that, because you're like, oh, wow, now people are actually looking forward to this. I've never had anybody looking forward to one of my books before. So now I actually have a little bit of an audience. I'm like, oh, wow, okay. So assuming that I don't let them down with Murder Mind, assuming that they like it, then I will start in next month in July. The book comes out June 19th. So I'll have some feedback by mid-July, and then I'll start writing the third one. But I have the first half outlined, and I get it to the most dramatic point that I can think of, and I have no idea what Shelley's going to do after this point. And that's what I did with Murder Mind. And in Murder Mind, I feel like it has my best midway point. Ironically, my weakest midway point is my very first book. My midway point to my first book was that they find the ship, and I love the visual of it because the ship is actually phased into the landscape. There's a line in the book about how it looked like God had just created this landscape, and the ship had always been there, and trees are growing in and out of it. And this, and that.
Yeah, that was cool image.
But midway point should not be a visual, and that's something I learned. And on my second book, I was a much stronger midway point. The whole first half is about Area 51, and then something happens, and now we're off to the races on the second half.
Yeah,
and that was a lesson that I learned as I went. I still stand behind the ship. I'm just saying that of my midway points, that's the only one that I'm like, I could have stuck the landing better on that one. More could have been at stake.
I hear what you're saying. As a reader, though, I did appreciate that visual. I like that a lot.
Good. Yeah, it was actually one of the first things I thought of when I thought of the ship back in like 2011 or something when I originally wrote the notes for that.
Nice. I like that you said that, by the midpoint, your character should be living and breathing on their own. It kind of reminds me of, I guess it's not quite the same thing, but Robert E. Howard, when he was talking about the idea of Conan, he was like, and Robert E. Howard's kind of crazy anyways, like this image of this man appeared before him and, telling him his adventures or whatever, So,
I mean, definitely, when you get to a point, especially when you start writing a series, those characters really do start to have a voice of their own. And another piece of advice I might give to writers, assuming that I just keep assuming that there are writers watching this.
I have a lot of writers and artist storytellers in the chat.
Then another piece of advice I would give is point of view is very important. None of my villains are wrong. Never have I written an antagonist in my books that are wrong. That doesn't mean that the heroes are wrong. It just means that I can completely understand their point of view.
Sure.
So I never write like a Nazi type character because that would be really hard to come up with, with a reason for why you want to wipe out, a third of the population. Whatever.
Yeah.
But I do write villains that have a very good reason for why they're doing it, and you can completely understand. On the other end of the spectrum, though, you don't want to do Star Trek Insurrection. That's a movie where, for some reason, nobody thought that actually the bad guys are 100% right and Picard is 100% wrong. Because in that movie, the idea is that they're trying to protect 200 people from the Fountain of Youth. No, you move those 200 people and you give billions of people the Fountain of Youth and cure a cancer and do all that. So they were wrong in that. So you don't want a bad guy to be that right. But you do want to make sure that your antagonist has a very good point of view that people get. Thanos was a good example of that I understood why Thanos was doing what he was doing.
Sure. Yeah.
So I try to always have people that aren't villains or antagonists. And I think that point of view in every character is really what drives people to turn pages.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you succeed in that. I got a couple of themes that I see, like common themes in the book so far, that I was going to run by you in a moment. But let me just get these super chats before I think Crystal Ashes is being cheeky here with us. Will the centipede appear in the sequel? I doubt it.
Unfortunately, there's actually nothing that adult in the new one, which is surprising. It didn't just happen that way. The next one's a road trip, so they probably didn't have time to stop off at
And it's organic in the it's organic in the first one because they're trying to fight or solve this murder, and one of their suspects or witnesses works in the club. So
yeah, exactly.
Studio Super says, for me, that was a big appeal for Star Trek, the original series. All these unique problems happening for our crew. How will they get out of them this week and what's not? You probably enjoyed
Star Trek. Spock was a huge influence on Shelley. I had a reviewer, this one website, Reading Freely, actually put Shelley in their top 10 sci-fi books of 2024, which was very nice.
Nice.
But they said that Shelley reminded them of 7 of 9, which I have nothing against 7 of 9. I thought she was a really great actress who did a really good portrayal. But she was aping Spock, same thing I'm doing. So I mean, really, we just had the same influence. I wasn't influenced. I went back to the original well, just like they did. I wasn't looking at 7 9. I was looking at Spock because Spock was interesting, and Shelley has pre-programmed emotions because to be a detective, her creator, Dr. Abraham, thought that she should be able to follow a hunch, and that's one of the aspects of the first book is Shelley learning how to follow a hunch and using her emotion, and so she considers them a hindrance. A human weakness that should never have been put in her any more than she should have looked like a woman. And that's the transition in the book is her growth in that. I mean, I got that. I totally stole that from Spock, the original.
Yeah, that's good. That's great though. Well, that kind of brings me to, some writers, you ask them about it and they're kind of like, they're not interested in talking about this. They're just kind of divorced from their themes. Their themes show up and they are what they are. But I just always find it interesting, especially as an English professor. I find it interesting because one of the things that draws me to your work is the theme of humanity. What is the legacy in the ship series and stuff like you were saying, but also just what does it mean? What defines us as humans? On the one level is the pronouns. On the other level, Shelley has a heart. That we find out in the beginning, or Dr. Abraham, gave her a heart.
Machine heart. Yeah, it makes it sound like a heartbeat. Yeah, it's artificial.
And it's kind of like what people do really defines their humanity. I don't want to give it away, but especially towards the end of Shelley, when there's a real conundrum. Don't give away the big twist ending. But it's a question that pops up over and over again, which I really love because that also helps define the heroes versus the villains. If both people are doing things that they really truly believe should be done or is right, which is the more human, or whatever. And it's just just questions that the book asks the reader, kind of to contemplate, which I appreciate. I don't know how much you think of that when you go in, or is that just something that sort of organically happens?
I think it organically happens. I think
because you've got Casey and Shelley, who are both dealing with sort of evolutions and are they human, are they not, and so forth.
Well, the two series are actually directly connected. It doesn't say that in the book, but there is a scene in the original ship book where the hero, Casey Stevens, sees a brief glimpse of the future. And in that brief glimpse, she sees a man-machine war that wipes out humanity. And Shelley's series takes place before that man-machine war. We'll never show the war because these are detective procedurals and crime stories. But I know what's coming. So, that's always in the back of my head. And that helps me sometimes with the bad guy, who maybe the bad guy's doing things to avert a war or try to give humans an advantage or something like that. Then maybe the bad guy's not completely wrong, but that's in hindsight. I'm seeing it here.
Yeah.
So I definitely play with that whole. The evolution is a big part of all my books.